It feels like judgment. And it's exhausting. For me, sometimes to the point of not being able to communicate. What did you think was completely normal in a relationship until you discovered it was abusive behavior? Constantly being called a crybaby because I get emotional over things. Happy, sad, real, fake, TV or movies, doesn't matter. I get teary-eyed and squeaky-voiced. It's just taught me that showing emotion is being weak. Wanting to know exactly where I am 24/7, and check-ins every couple of hours. I think it is normal to check in with your partner. It is important to communicate with each other and have an idea of each other's safety. You could be referring to an obsessive behavior where they are constantly demanding to know where you are. That is not normal. I have been in that situation where it felt like they were trying to control my days, where I was, who I was talking to, and what I was doing. It was exhausting. Being in the same room doing different things and literally getting mad if I didn't say I love you every so often. I'd gotten so used to it that I didn't realize it wasn't normal until my college roommate asked me about it. I'm still salty that my first college boyfriend accused me of cheating while out of town because I A, didn't check in with him as often as usual, and B, had little to no physical drive when I got back. I was at my grandpa's funeral. My ex downloaded an app that was connected to my phone number. Every time I opened WhatsApp, a notification popped up on his phone. I noticed it when he forgot to silence the app and I started a chat with a friend. He told me that he downloaded it for knowing when I was awake. I thought the silent treatment after an argument was totally normal because my mom did the same thing. Turns out it's not normal at all. Somebody replied, "My husband would literally tell me he's not going to talk to me for a week. He would think that would make me think about what I did, then that was a free pass for him to do whatever he wanted. If I tried to reach out I would be ignored. I thought that was normal too. When we shared a credit card he would shut mine off sometimes. We have 4 kids together. Scary what we think is normal till we're taken out of the situation." Love bombing. Gifts? Surprise trips? Huge gestures? This person must really like me. This is going to well. Nope. All of that was to make me believe they were a great person before the abuse set in. For 2 years I tried to get the old them back. It was a total whirlwind. I was the best thing ever, incomparable with any other woman he'd ever known, the best lover, the most unique, the ultimate match for his untamable ways. He was almost 40 and never married, successful science career, owned his home, handsome, PhD. I was bowled over with my catch. Within 3 months he'd paid for tickets to travel across the world to meet his family. But by the time that came to pass 3 months later, he was different man altogether. The trip was a nightmare. I still spent the next 2 years trying to get it back on track. I was so crushed by what had been ripped away from me that I was in a daze. Awful. Somebody replied, "This is wild. It doesn't feel like abuse at all in your mind. Meanwhile the abuser is just setting up their strategy to lock you in." My ex used to pick me up from work daily with a bouquet of flowers, and our first date was a helicopter ride over the city. Fancy dinners, vacations, etc., all within the first few months of dating. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before with a guy, and I was surprised at how quickly I was falling for him. Cut to about 8 months in and a lot of that behavior died off. Then came the anger, abuse, and his true colors. I'm just glad I'll recognize the signs of love bombing right away now while dating. One of the worst and cruelest abuse tactics in my opinion. I always had to prove my love for him, even in scenarios he made up in his own head or caused himself. If I didn't go that extra mile, if I didn't accept this new change, if I didn't forgive him, if I didn't do what he asked, it meant I didn't love him. It was a mountain I could never climb. Wanting to talk about stuff was trying to look for a fight. I was told every time, "Why can't I just let things go?" What this means, really, is why can't you respect my authority over you? Because the people that say this often have issues with you and what you're doing, but they feel they are the inherent authority over you, so any challenge to that is met with offense at or questioning their control or superior opinion to yours. I am responsible for making sure that nothing goes wrong in the other person's life and they never have a disappointment. Turns out that makes every disappointment or sadness my partner feels my fault, even if I have no control and can't fix it. I started lying about things to protect my ex's feelings because I couldn't deal with all the blame and verbal abuse. I still have the impulse to lie to my current partner if I ever have to give bad news. A couple months ago I lost something he gave me, and quietly replaced it. He noticed it was different last night and I confessed. He thought it was sweet that I liked it so much that I replaced it myself. Somebody replied, I have experienced this as well. It felt like it was my job to make sure she was happy. And anytime she wasn't, of course it was my fault. Even today, waking someone up triggers me so much. My mind races if they push back at all. If they aren't getting up, they will be late, and it'll all be my fault. Because it was my responsibility to wake them up. It gives me anxiety attacks to do this. Having small disagreements turn into being screamed at and threatened with abandonment. So what if the clothes stayed in the washer overnight? It's not something to be upset about. Not being exactly where you said you'd be. Having to check in whenever plans change slightly. Note it's a good idea someone knows where you are, but if you move from bar A to bar B next door you shouldn't be afraid because you know they will be angry. Somebody replied, once started screaming at me because I put a dirty spoon in with the clean ones in the dishwasher. So as he's screaming at me, and I at him, I washed all of them in the sink. He was still yelling at me by the way while I was doing this and telling me not to. I'm a year out of the marriage and I'm now just picking up on abusive things he did to me. This just reminded me of one behavior and fight. Thank you. Infantilization. It's not normal for teenage girls to be treated like toddlers. I was 14 and still slept with my mom, still called her mommy, asked her to potty, didn't cut my own food, and didn't wash my own clothes. I was with a friend at her house and asked her mom if I could use the potty. The look on her face was priceless. Somebody replied, I have the opposite problem of my parents. They will act like children. My mom will throw a tantrum if she can't figure out something on her phone, complete with whining, screaming, and throwing things. This triggers me to rush to help her. When my dad was in my life, he would cry if he felt ignored. It's called learned helplessness, and with therapy I'm getting better at not responding to this behavior. I'm not sure if it's abusive, but when they need a reason every time you disagree with their point of view, it could be a big thing or a small thing. Sometimes you disagree because your gut disagrees and there is no logical reason behind it. Somebody replied, I know people like this and I'm really bad at handling it. I'll try to explain my point of view. The default in a conversation should be to take the other person seriously. To me, having to back up everything I say and every opinion I have feels like my opinions are worthless. It feels like judgment. And it's exhausting. For me, sometimes to the point of not being able to communicate. I start thinking about every word I say because I want to avoid this exhausting judgment situation. That's not something I want when talking to friends, family or a partner. Also, we're talking opinions. There doesn't have to be a reason for an opinion. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a moral you believe in, something that you can't prove. And that's okay. That's why it's an opinion, not a fact. But it makes a difference if someone is asking because they are judgmental or because of honest interest. Second one is fine. Just not every single time. Growing up, I thought it was normal for parents to scream and hit their children. Most of my friends' parents hit their kids, and yelling matches between teens and kids are normalized on television and social media. I was in college when someone challenged this belief and stated blatantly that spanking was abuse, and what I was describing, being hit with hairbrushes, paddles, sticks, belts, etc., was way past that line. It took me a while to really deconstruct that and accept that they were right. It was abusive. And it never taught me any lessons, it just taught me how to be better at not getting caught. Somebody replied, I am so sorry that you had to experience that as a child. I had a similar upbringing and realization. I jokingly brought up my childhood abuse in front of friends in college because it was so normalized to me. Nobody laughed and someone mentioned the word abuse to describe my experience for the first time. I was so embarrassed at that moment, but I am grateful that I know it was not normal parenting and what my parents did to me was not okay. Being woken up in the night to him literally doing whatever he wanted to me and not having a choice or just being too scared to tell him to stop. If I was wearing revealing clothes, then I was asking for it, so should expect it to happen. He would get angry and guilt trip me if I tried to say no, and so much more. He somehow convinced me that the things he was doing to me were normal and okay because we were married. Somebody replied, "My ex did this a handful of times," and when asked about it, he was shocked and said he must have been doing it in his sleep. He then claimed a few weeks later that I had tried to do the same to him in my sleep, which makes no sense since I literally sleep like a rock. After seeing his abusive and toxic behavior during our very long drawn-out breakup, it only makes sense to me that he was lying and knew perfectly well what he was doing. Somebody replied, "So sorry this happened to you too." It's amazing how people like this all have similar behaviors and phrases. My ex-husband also used to claim that I sometimes started it, but he was okay with it because it's what he wanted apparently. This really upset me, so a few times I'd test it and pretend to be asleep just to see what happened. It was always initiated by him. He'd sometimes put my hands on him in places that he wanted them, but I didn't start anything. I've since been scared to go to sleep next to someone else in case by some chance it was me, but I have been reassured I don't do anything. Still plays on my mind though. It's really affected me. It's been good to read your reply. Thank you. I'm currently working through the trauma of an abusive ex-boyfriend. This includes several violent rapes, physical abuse, and emotional abuse. This just reminded me after 5 years that he did this to me too. I went into therapy thinking I wanted to talk about the one really violent time and why I stayed in that relationship for so long. Every week that passes, I remember more stuff like this. I realize weekly that he intentionally made me scared of him. The abuse was all systematic. He always made me feel like I was guilty until proven innocent. My thoughts and motives were always questioned by him. He never trusted me and thought that I would do things to intentionally harm him. When we got into arguments, he dissected every single thing I did and said. Then it got to a point that I started questioning my own thoughts and reasoning. I felt like a crazy person, and it wasn't until I started talking with others about it did I realize it wasn't normal. My ex was always too critical of things I would say in normal conversation and would bring them up later in arguments. For example, when we were 7 months into the relationship and I was talking about something and said if we get married. Later he brought it up in a fight that I used if instead of when, so he thinks I'm not sure about him. I thought I would do things to intentionally harm him because that's how his brain worked and he behaved. So he expected it out of me as well. Learning how to tell myself my partner made a mistake and wasn't being malicious took a long time to relearn after my ex. Not abusive, but definitely toxic, never wanting to go on dates. She'd be affectionate with me at school and in private and stuff, but never once in our 2.5-year relationship did she take me on a date. And for some reason I never thought that was weird. Hell, she bought me a whole promise ring without ever having been on a real date with me. Still have no clue why she never did, but I know that behavior is weird. I knew she was dating other people at the same time as me, and some of them knew about me, but I suspect that some of them didn't. I was afraid of my partner's anger. I wasn't allowed to have any social interaction without his permission, and I had to follow strict guidelines. I was alienated from my own family. I went 100% no contact with my parents for 5 years at his behest. My own salary was withheld and I wasn't allowed to spend money on anything. I was denied needed medical care, because I didn't deserve it. I was gaslit and told that I was a liar and crazy. I'm safe now. Several years and a restraining order later. Somebody replied, "Extreme anger is scary. It doesn't matter if it isn't directed at you. Extreme anger is destabilizing because there is always the potential for the person to act out the anger in a dangerous way." My father had a huge anger problem and he would sometimes get angry and hit the dogs. I was never physically abused, but I was afraid of my dad my entire childhood because his anger was scary. Let alone the dog abuse was just painful to watch. I also want to say that extreme anger can be scary regardless of the gender. Tiny people can be just as scary as large people potentially. So much of it depends on the level of extreme anger and or propensity history or threat of violence. The truly master manipulators don't have to actually use any violence, and the threats can be implicit and subconscious. Total control. My first boyfriend controlled everything, even the music I listened to and the friends I talked to. I am not saying that he always requested access to my messages in social networks. I thought that it was okay, because I had very controlling parents. My current significant other told me explicitly not to listen to one of my favorite bands, and I haven't for 2 years out of fear. They also judge me if I listen to a certain type of music, so I haven't listened to that either out of fear and anxiety that I'm doing something wrong. I was gaslit into thinking I was the problem and the cause of his rage-fueled outbursts. We're having a good day, I drop a fork in the kitchen by accident, it makes a slight noise, he screams at me. I thought I was too loud, too clumsy, too inconsiderate, etc. I suppose self-blame became normal. I turn down intimacy. He sulks, doesn't speak to me all night and gives me the silent treatment, then doesn't message me the entire next day, sometimes 2. But when we're both home from work 48 hours later, he's acting normal again. I ask to talk about it and he says talk about what? Nothing happened. Somebody replied, my mother pretended everything was normal and like nothing happened when I was still crying from the screaming row 10 minutes earlier. Usually accompanied with some outsized punishment or loss of privileges. For example, you can walk the 4 miles to work this week. I never heard an apology after the screaming and name calling. Then I went to the bedroom full of guilt and shame. An hour later, they were cooking dinner as if nothing happened. I fully expected to forget the events of the day, but the whole family was pretending like nothing unusual happened. I still felt shitty and alone with the unprocessed memory. Years later, I have these complicated feelings towards them. I know that there were a lot of these days and I'm still hurt, but nobody remembers it and I feel like I am the problem or bad apple for having bad feelings towards them. His friends would flirt with me, and he was unbothered by it, so I thought I was misreading the situation and that was just how they acted. I played along because I didn't want to create any tension. Then, when his friends left, he would berate me and scream in my face about what a tease I was, and maybe throw a chair or table across the room for good measure. Then, when he had me reduced to tears and ready to walk away, he would tell me he only reacts that way because he loves me so much, and he is so sorry, but he just loves me so much it makes him crazy. I felt flattered and accepted his promises of better behavior. I thought it was passion. Until a glass ashtray flew across the room and hit me in the head, knocking me out. I started getting dragged around by my ponytail. Only then did I think, you know, this just doesn't feel like love. Yeah, I think he is going to kill me. As a child, I had to anticipate my parents' needs and do it before they asked. For example, if I noticed my mom's cup was empty, I had to refill it before she asked. If she had to ask, I got in trouble. I wasn't allowed to say no, and every statement had to be interpreted as a command. The garden looks dry meant go water the garden right now. Somebody replied, later in life, after this treatment, you will have to be careful around people, then you will have to learn to not feel bad for relaxing and doing your thing while other people are around. A childhood friend constantly criticizes me and points out my flaws in order to help me. It took me forever to realize it wasn't helpful, but actually hurtful. And I truly think she thought she was helping. But she couldn't handle the conversation where I pointed out how much it hurt me and told her she was being harsh. Hypocrite. My mother always used to gossip about me behind my back with friends and family, even though it bothered me. My mom always did it. It's what women do, and I allowed women I tried to date to do the same thing, even though I hate it. But the other day I overheard a conversation with my friend's girlfriend and all her friends. They were trying to gossip about my friend, and his girlfriend shut it down real quick. So now I won't tolerate that anymore. If you have experienced any of the acts mentioned in this video, please seek help. It is not fair on anybody to stay in that kind of situation.